It started with a string of unexplained drownings scattered across the Midwest. Young men vanishing after a night of celebration, their disappearances shrouded in mystery and ending in tragedy, their bodies claimed by unforgiving waters. Each case stood alone, solitary and unconnected, until the early 2000s when several veteran investigators started to make connections. These detectives identified 45 cases matching their victim profile. The victims, predominantly young men, were last seen in the early morning hours at clubs and bars before being recovered from the water. The detectives proposed a theory as unsettling as the crimes themselves. This was the work of one or multiple organized serial killers. Their profile became known as the Smiley Face Killer theory, named after the graffiti that was frequently found where the bodies were recovered. However, they were met with skepticism. The FBI dismissed this theory nearly 15 years ago, deeming the connections were too tenuous and the evidence too speculative. Over the years, the credibility of the theory eroded, its echoes fading into the background. However, the past refuses to be silenced. A series of eerily similar drownings in Chicago, Illinois, and Austin, Texas, have brought renewed attention to this dismissed theory. The victim profile is hauntingly familiar. Young men drowned or unceremoniously discarded in bodies of water. In Chicago's Lake Michigan, there are 11 suspicious drownings that have occurred since 2022, and in Austin's Lady Bird Lake, the bodies of 4 men have been recovered this year alone. The reports of these deaths sent shockwaves through their communities and brought nationwide speculation. The smiley face, once a symbol of positivity, tainted with darker connotations. A chilling reminder of the alleged killer or killers, a new iteration of something decades old, a sinister design woven by unseen hands. This is the return of the Smiley Face Killers. Your personal data is a commodity, bought and sold with just a few clicks. Data brokers are profiting at the expense of your privacy. They assemble shadow profiles of alarmingly intimate details about your location, income, health, and more. Then, they sell these data profiles to any interested party. This information could be exploited by scammers, companies, and even the government. Strangers can purchase your most personal information for identity theft, stalking, or worse. That's why I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, Incogni. I can reclaim my personal data from the internet. By leveraging automated data removal and privacy laws, they remove personal information from the internet, and they don't stop until your data is secured. Go to incogni.com/Pandox and use the code Pandox for an exclusive 60% off, or click the link below. Incogni, your data, your control. The Smiley Face Killer theory traces its roots to the 1997 death of college students Patrick James McNeil and Lawrence Andrew Jr. Retired NYPD detective Kevin Gannon dedicated his post-retirement career to investigating these cases and those like them. His collaborators include Anthony Duarte, another law enforcement veteran, and Dr. D. Lee Gilbertson, a criminal justice expert and academic. They reinvestigated several drowning cases to reveal a deeper mystery. They believed that a group of organized serial killers across the Midwest were targeting young, white male college students who were often at the prime of their lives. They were physically fit, academically successful, and popular. Their bodies were recovered with traces of alcohol that were not sufficient to cause severe intoxication. Several bodies contained traces of GHB or other sedatives, strengthening the hypothesis that these victims had been drugged. The investigators compiled a 2014 book, Case Studies in Drowning Forensics, and outlined 14 deaths between 1997 and 2009, which they believed were linked to the Smiley Face Killers. The book argues that many of the recovered bodies did not have characteristics that match other drowning cases, and it suggests that the victims were killed and dumped in the water. They proposed that cells of killers were communicating via the dark web and committing these atrocities as gang initiations, hate crimes, or jealousy of the victim's privilege and early success. The investigators claimed that this group could be responsible for more than 300 homicides across the United States, and they suggested strange symbols, particularly smiley faces, were often left near the scene as the perpetrators' method of taunting police. The following are 5 unsettling cases from their research. Patrick James McNeil was a 20-year-old student at Fordham University at the time of his death in 1997. He was a white male, 6'1" and 185 pounds. He was last seen leaving a bar in Manhattan, severely intoxicated, stumbling and vomiting as he left the venue. Witnesses reported that he was followed by a vehicle driven by a man and a woman. His body was recovered more than 12 miles away from his last known location, and he was face up, which is anomalous for drowning cases. Gannon argues that the water current patterns would have made it impossible for his body to end up in this location naturally. Furthermore, he argues that the blood alcohol level found at autopsy was equivalent to about 6 drinks and would not have been sufficient to cause the level of intoxication the witnesses observed, suggesting the possibility that McNeil had been drugged. Markings on the body could suggest a possible ligature mark around McNeil's neck, and independent investigators found damage to McNeil's skull that was not described in the original autopsy. Additionally, blackening on the skin of the head and torso raised the chilling possibility that McNeil had been set on fire before his death. These markings that were attributed to natural decomposition could have been evidence of assault. Lastly, McNeil was found floating face up, yet no lividity was observed on the back of his body, suggesting he must not have been in a face-up position for long, and the condition of the body suggested that it would have been impossible for McNeil to have been in the water for several weeks. Gannon concluded that McNeil had been drugged, abducted, and murdered. The death of Lawrence Robert Andrews Jr. bore many similarities to McNeil's case. Andrews was a 21-year-old who was 6'3" and 185 pounds. On New Year's Eve 1997, he reportedly became separated from his group after leaving a bar in the early morning hours of the new year. He was last seen on the streets of New York City around 2:30 a.m. His body was recovered over a month later. He was found at the same pollution control plant as McNeil, over 9 miles away from his last known location. His body was found in a face-up position, similar to McNeil, but the lividity of the body suggested he had died face down. The autopsy noted bruising around his eyes and nose, and the blood alcohol content at the time of the autopsy was equivalent to 8 beers, which investigators believed was not enough to incapacitate Andrews. Drug screenings were clean, but they did not include testing for ketamine, rohypnol, or GHB. Gannon and Gilbertson argued that the physical condition of the body was not consistent with having been in the water for over 40 days. In fact, they didn't believe Andrews had been in the water for even a week. The investigators concluded that Andrews had been abducted, held captive, tortured, and killed, and the perpetrators had disposed of his body in the same location as McNeil's to deliberately taunt the police. Brian Welzian, a 22-year-old finance major at Northwest Illinois University, partied with friends on New Year's Eve 1999. He was 5'9" and 145 pounds, a college athlete playing on the university's soccer team. On the night of his disappearance, he and his friends rented a room at the Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago and attended a party on Lakeshore Drive before going to a pub at approximately 11:15 p.m. According to multiple witnesses, Welzian only had 2 drinks while at the bar and did not appear to be intoxicated. At around 2 a.m., he stated that he wanted to leave, so a friend drove him back to the hotel. He fell asleep during the drive, and when his friend woke him up, he was staggering and vomiting. Around 3:45 a.m., a witness reported seeing Welzian vomiting by the curb near the hotel. This was the last time he was ever seen. When his friends returned to the hotel just 15 minutes later, they realized that Welzian was not there. Despite searching for 2 hours, they were unable to locate him. Smiley face graffiti was found on the walls of the pedestrian tunnels in the vicinity of the hotel. Months later, on March 17, 2000, Welzian's body was found on a beach in Gary, Indiana, about 40 miles from his hotel. His death was initially considered suspicious by officials, with one police supervisor voicing the opinion that Brian was the victim of a violent crime that had been perpetrated by someone unknown to him. The coroner's report concluded that the immediate cause of death was drowning, but that the manner of death was undetermined. According to Gannon and Gilbertson's analysis, Welzian's blood alcohol level was equivalent to only 3 drinks at most, corroborating the testimony of witnesses. Because this would not have been sufficient to explain his intoxicated state after returning to the hotel, the investigators theorized that he was drugged. While tests of Welzian's blood did not reveal the presence of any other substances, the test was not comprehensive and may not have included drugs such as GHB. An additional detail from the autopsy is that while the pattern of the lividity on the body was consistent with the face-up position, Welzian was actually found face down. The investigators argue that he may have been killed and left on his back for several hours before being placed face down in the water. Gannon and Gilbertson believe that the body showed far too few signs of decomposition for Welzian to have been in the water for several months. They concluded he likely suffered the same fate as McNeil and Andrews. The 2004 death of Adam Michael Falcon was another case linked by Gannon and Gilbertson to the Smiley Face Killers. Falcon was a 20-year-old philosophy student at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, and he played on the university's soccer team. On the evening of November 12, 2004, he attended a hockey game with friends from about 7 to 9 p.m., then went to a party on a campus residence where the group played drinking games. They later went to a coffee shop, followed by a visit to the Hoot Owl Bar, where Falcon was denied entry as he was using a fake ID. Falcon returned to the party at the dorms around 11:30 p.m. and left with a friend around 12:30 a.m. to go to a bar called the TikTok Inn. Falcon was spotted leaving the building around 1:38 a.m. through the back door. 5 days later, his body was discovered in a sinkhole in the Grass River, which was in the opposite direction from his residence. The investigators argued that the spot where Adam was recovered was absolutely illogical and contradicted evidence trails on land, especially given that earlier in the night, he demonstrated that he was easily able to navigate the area, even while intoxicated. Moreover, personal effects such as his hat and phone were found in an unlikely location, far from his body without any detectable scent trail. This suggests that the items could have been placed there by the perpetrator. The phone in particular was found on a pile of leaves on the porch of a church building that had been searched the previous day. This aroused suspicion that it had been intentionally placed there for investigators to find. Later, examination of the shoreline revealed a trail of shoe prints leading to the location where Falcon's body was found, but these tracks did not match the sneakers worn by Falcon. They appeared to have been a pair of Oxford dress shoes. However, the police never followed up on this lead. The autopsy report concluded that Falcon had likely fallen asleep outdoors after leaving the bar, and suffering from hypothermia, he drowned in the river while disoriented. Gannon and Gilbertson argue that the autopsy showed no physical findings associated with hypothermia. Moreover, Falcon's body was still in rigor mortis at the autopsy, and there was no evidence of decomposition. Gannon and Gilbertson believe that this means he could not have died on the night that he left the bar. Instead, they believe that he had been killed several days later. The Todd Douglas Gieb case followed just a year later. Gieb, a 22-year-old from Casanova, Michigan, was described as an athlete who also excelled at hunting, fishing, and hiking. He was a similar build and stature as most of the victims, standing at 5'11" and 180 pounds. He had close ties to his family and was a devout Christian. On June 11, 2005, he spent the afternoon with his family in Ravenna, Michigan, before going out drinking with friends. The group visited the Half Moon Bar and Grill before going to a keg party at an abandoned orchard. Graffiti of a smiley face with devil horns was found near the orchard. Around midnight, Gieb allegedly told a friend that he was leaving the party to walk home. However, according to other accounts, he may have been involved in a fight at the orchard around 12:45 a.m. Some witnesses recounted seeing a group of strangers who seemed to be looking for a fight. Before 1 a.m., Gieb or someone using his phone attempted to make 4 phone calls. In the first of these calls, the recipient recalled hearing someone say, "I'm in a field," in a voice that sounded out of breath. In the second, there was no voice, only heavy breathing or possibly wind. The final calls lasted for less than 1 second. This was the last contact from Gieb. 3 weeks later, his body was discovered in Ovid Hall Lake by a couple on a fishing trip. This location is in the opposite direction from his house. The toxicology report disclosed the presence of alcohol in Gieb's bloodstream, as well as metabolites of nicotine, which was not surprising as he was known to be a smoker. However, an unexpected finding was made. Gieb's blood tested positive for high levels of desipramine and amitriptyline, antidepressant drugs that can have incapacitating side effects at high dosages. Gieb was not known to suffer from depression and would have had no reason to be prescribed these drugs. Additionally, these substances are not known to be used for recreational purposes. These results suggested that Gieb could have been maliciously drugged. Contrary to the medical examiner's reports, the investigators believe that the condition of Gieb's body indicates that he had only been deceased for about 2.5 days before being placed in the water. Their hypothesis is that he was abducted and held captive for several weeks before being drugged and murdered. Despite this, his death was officially ruled an accidental drowning. But even after his death, suspicious events continued to occur. After the Gieb family had discussed the case on TV, Gieb's sister reported repeatedly having been stalked by a stranger in a car. These incidents only stopped after the stranger tried to run her off the road. Gieb's cousin, who had publicly asserted that he believed Gieb was murdered, had his home mysteriously burned down while on vacation. It was ruled a case of arson, but no culprit was ever identified. Finally, on the 3rd anniversary of Gieb's death, a smiley face decal was placed on his gravestone, a seemingly deliberate nod to the Smiley Face Killers. The Smiley Face Killer theory was immediately met with skepticism. Critics argued that accidental drownings of young men are common, and the theory is drawing connections that are tenuous at best. They proposed that the deaths were tragic accidents, not homicides. The demographic of college-aged young men is known to drink alcohol in excess and engage in risky behavior. Additionally, the victim profile has been dismissed as confirmation bias, in which critics believe that drownings outside of this age, race, and education level are ignored to fit the profile. They believe the presence of GHB could be a byproduct of decomposition or a reflection of willing participation in recreational drug use. Even the smiley face graffiti is explained as a common fixture in urban areas. In 2008, the Federal Bureau of Investigation released the following brief statement. Over the past several years, law enforcement and the FBI have received information about young, college-aged men who were found deceased in rivers in the Midwest. To date, we have not developed any evidence to support links between these tragic deaths or any evidence substantiating the theory that these deaths are the work of a serial killer or killers. This statement did not deter Gannon, Duarte, or Gilbertson. They continued their investigation into suspicious serial drownings, determined to prove their theory. In 2022, clusters of new cases began to surface in Chicago's Lake Michigan and Austin's Lady Bird Lake, thrusting the Smiley Face Killer theory back into the harsh light of speculation. In recent years, the tranquil waterways of Chicago have been marred by a series of grim discoveries. Lifeless bodies of predominantly young men emerging from the depths, some within mere days of each other. These chilling incidents have sparked whispers of a possible killer lurking in the shadows. 11 bodies were found in Lake Michigan and the Chicago River in 2022. According to FBI Special Agent Tracy Walder, the similarities in the victims' profiles and the manners of their deaths suggest that a serial killer could be involved. The first drowning connected to the Chicago cluster occurred in November 2021, but received widespread reporting in January 2022. The body of a young man was recovered from the Chicago River near the 1100 block of South Wells Street. The body was identified as 23-year-old Inaki Bascarin, a recent graduate from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign who was working in the advertising industry. He was last seen leaving Celeste Bar on West Hubbard Street on the night of October 30th, 2021. Around 11:45 p.m., he texted friends to say he was outside the bar and trying to get back in. A short time later, he FaceTimed his roommate to say that he was heading home, more than 5 miles away. He attempted to make the journey on foot, but he was never heard from again. The medical examiner ruled that Bascarin had died from drowning, but could not determine whether or not his death was accidental. On April 16th, 2 bodies were recovered from the Chicago River. One, found near the 2800 block of South Eleanor Street, was identified as an elderly woman named Yuet Sang. The other woman, found at the 100 block of North Riverside Plaza, could not be identified. A day later, the body of an unknown male was found near the 3000 block of Fort Dearborn Drive. The Cook County Medical Examiner's Office reported that this victim was a black male between 21 and 30 years old, standing at about 5'8" and weighing 173 pounds. He has numerous distinctive tattoos and was found wearing name-brand clothing. 2 weeks later, on May 1st, police recovered the body of 31-year-old Eden De La O from the river near 41st Street and Central Avenue. The young man had been reported missing a month earlier. He had gone to a bar with an acquaintance on April 3rd. Around 1 a.m., he called his mother, who reported that he sounded scared. He was last seen in the Brighton Park neighborhood around the 3400 block of Southwestern Avenue. On May 2nd, a woman's body was found in Lake Michigan near the 5500 block of North Sheridan Avenue. She was identified as 22-year-old Natalie Brookson, a University of Illinois student who had gone missing after leaving work on April 30th. She worked at Friedman Place, an assisted living facility for the blind. 26-year-old Daniel Sotelo went missing from a train station on the same day. He was a graduate student in chemistry at the same university. On May 22nd, Sotelo's body was found in a lake in the village of Wilmette, Illinois, about 8 miles north of where Brookson was found. Sotelo was about to graduate with a master's degree and had recently been discussing his plans for the future. According to fellow students, the couple seemed happy and successful, and they could think of no explanation for their tragic deaths. The medical examiner's report states that Sotelo had died by drowning, but the cause of death could not be determined. The medical examiner was unable to identify a cause of death for Brookson, and online commenters have speculated that their deaths may be the result of a pact, while others suspect foul play. Krzysztof Zubert, a 21-year-old Polish native, had been living out of various hotels in Chicago since November 2022. In December, he was staying at the Joliet Hotel. Employed by a local software firm, Zubert was reported missing after he didn't return from a party at Howl at the Moon, a bar on West Hubbard Street, on December 3, 2022. Tragically, his body was recovered from Lake Michigan on December 7th. Zubert was found to have suffered a laceration to his head. Despite this, his cause of death was officially reported as accidental drowning, secondary to alcohol intoxication. Just days later, the lifeless body of Peter Salvino was recovered from the icy waters of Diversey Harbor on December 20th. Salvino was a 25-year-old in his third year of a PhD in neuroscience at Northwestern University. He had vanished into the night after a party on North Geneva Terrace on December 18th, assuring his friends he was heading home on foot. His phone pinged at the area of the harbor at 12:31 a.m., a puzzling mile west of his residence and off the route to his home. A friend messaged him 6 minutes later, but he never responded. The official cause of death was an accidental drowning that occurred while under the influence. On January 29, 2023, another unidentified male was found in Lake Michigan. He was recovered just after 11 a.m. at the 1100 block of South Lakeshore Drive. He has not been identified and no other information has been released at this time. The following month, on February 8th, a male body was recovered from the Chicago River near the 2800 block of South Eleanor. No additional information has been released on this case. Just a week later, on February 15th, the body of 28-year-old Anthony Rucker was recovered from the Chicago Sanitary and Ship Canal. He had vanished just 3 days earlier. March brought no respite for the city of Chicago. On the 16th, the lifeless body of 24-year-old Joel Orduno was retrieved from the Chicago River in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. He was last seen at his Logan Square residence a month prior. Police have since closed the investigation and classified his death as non-criminal, as his cause of death was determined to be drowning and the manner of death was undetermined. 2 days later, on March 18th, a 21-year-old U.S. Navy sailor named Seamus Gray was reported missing after being ejected from the Ibiza nightclub in Waukegan, a Chicago suburb. He was reportedly too intoxicated, and he left the area on foot. The nightclub is reportedly rough, and one review of the establishment from December 2022 is eerily similar to Gray's disappearance. I witnessed a male asking for help because he was in danger from people. I saw this young man asking for help. There was a group of guys waiting outside for him. He didn't know these people. His phone was also stolen. Surveillance footage last captured Gray at the intersection of Sheridan Road and Washington just before 2 a.m. An extensive search effort proved fruitless, and he was ultimately found dead on April 19th in Lake Michigan near Waukegan Harbor. His autopsy revealed a high blood alcohol concentration, and his cause of death was officially reported as drowning. The medical examiner reported that no injuries were found on his body. When these deaths and disappearances are plotted on a map, a chilling pattern begins to emerge. The victims disappeared from locations along the shore of Lake Michigan, and their bodies found several miles from where they were last seen. In a disturbing coincidence, Biscarin and Schubert disappeared from bars on the same street, just 1 block away from each other, and the bodies of Yuet Sang and the unidentified male surfaced in the same location. As we descend further, the haunting specter of uncertainty lingers. The city's waterways, once a symbol of life and vibrancy, are the backdrop for eerie tragedies that defy simple explanation. While officials continue to report these cases as accidental drownings, the uncanny similarities and unsettling circumstances suggest something more ominous. On March 12th, TikToker Ken Wax posted a viral video in which he claimed to have encountered the perpetrators. He stated that within the past 2 months, he was offered a ride by a stranger On both occasions, the stranger was driving the same car. When Wax declined to get in the car, the driver rapidly left the scene. He stated that the car was followed by a van and both sped away. Wax theorizes that the killer's accomplice convinces drunk men to enter their car, after which they are potentially drugged, then taken into the killer's van and murdered. He believes that the killer primarily targets men, since most women would not be willing to get into a car with a man they don't know. Wax's experience of being followed by strangers in a car echoes eyewitness accounts of Patrick McNeil and social media testimony from other Chicago residents. The Chicago Department of Business Affairs and Consumer Protection has received 12 complaints of fake taxis from 2022 to March 2023. Wax states that he has been collaborating with the Chicago police, as well as Gannon and Duarte, to help identify the culprit behind the murders.
If you want proof, I'll give it to you, but I'm not doing it for you or for the thousands of comments I've seen calling me a grifter or the Reddit conspiracy theory about me. This is for anyone who is on the fence about contacting me, anyone who wasn't sure if I was being serious or if this was being taken seriously. This is from the detective that showed up at my house on Sunday night. You can see clearly he asks me to reach out to Kevin. And this email's from Detective Gannon yesterday after I talked to him for almost 2 hours on Tuesday night. I'll let you pause and read, whatever. But you can actually see right here, I sent him 2 video clips. Yeah, that's a different break in the Austin case.
Wax continued his activism by mapping reports from viewers and attempting to raise awareness with the Chicago Police Department. His motivations were called into question when his videos started to include solicitation for funding for his startup company, where he served as chief marketing officer. The controversy surrounding Wax escalated when the CEO of his startup created a LinkedIn blog post crediting Wax's TikTok page with a marked increase in the number of their app downloads. The CEO boasted that Wax clearly tipped the algorithm in their favor, and the results have been truly astonishing. He stated that they had plans to incorporate more app integrations in future videos. This sparked a wave of accusations and outrage on social media, with individuals accusing Wax of exaggerating or inventing his claims to exploit public fear and suspicion and promote his startup. This outrage was worsened when Wax claimed to be working with a private investigator and the FBI, and the backlash led to him being ostracized from the platform, posting an apology video before taking a 2-month hiatus. As of July 2023, he has since returned to TikTok. Whether or not all of Wax's claims are true, the viral response to his videos clearly demonstrates that the community is concerned for their safety and desperately looking for answers. And tragically, Chicago wouldn't be the only city left in fear about what lurked along the shoreline. In early 2023, whispers of a potential serial killer began to echo through the streets of Austin, Texas, following the discovery of 4 male bodies in Lady Bird Lake, a large reservoir located in downtown Austin. Local police have denied that the incidents are connected, but many of the victims' families believe that foul play was involved. Additionally, Kevin Gannon is convinced of something far more sinister. Almost all of the victims disappeared from Rainey Street, a part of the city known for its bars and nightlife. Locals have speculated that the perpetrator could be targeting men in this area, drugging, abducting, and murdering them in the same modus operandi of the Smiley Face Killers. The first victim of 2023 was Jason John. John was a 30-year-old man who worked for a research and consulting firm. His family was based in New York, but he had been living in Austin for the past 2 years. Standing at 5'10" and weighing 190 pounds, John was last seen enjoying a night on the town with his friends on February 14th. The following day, his mother Elsie received a call stating that John had not returned home, leaving his pet dog unattended. The last sighting of John was around 2 a.m. on February 5th on Rainey Street, heading towards Lady Bird Lake. One account states that John was seen vomiting at the side of the lake before slipping and falling in the water. The witness, a homeless man, claimed to have called 911. John's body was not recovered until 8 days later on February 13th, when first responders retrieved his remains from the lake in the vicinity of 30 East Avenue. There were no indications that he had been physically assaulted. The autopsy revealed that there was alcohol in John's bloodstream at the time of his death. However, he tested negative for illicit drugs. The medical examiner ruled that his death was an accidental drowning. The following month, another man was found dead in the lake. The body of 40-year-old Clifton Axtell was discovered on March 5th near 1100 West Riverside Drive. Axtell worked in the real estate industry in Austin and was a student at Harvard Extension School at the time of his death. He was married with 2 children and a faithful Christian who regularly led worship services at his church. Little information is publicly available about the circumstances of his disappearance and death. According to the Austin Police Department, the death was not deemed to be suspicious. Less than a month later, on the 1st of April, the body of 33-year-old Jonathan Honey was recovered from the lake near 10 Rainey Street, the same street where Jason John had disappeared. Honey was based in Washington, D.C., but he had traveled to Austin for a bachelor party. He had a master's degree in engineering and worked for Washington Gas. He was reported missing on March 31st and was last seen at a food truck on Rainey Street. According to local police, his cause of death was under investigation as of April 2023. His obituary describes his death as a tragic accident. Just 2 weeks later, 30-year-old Christopher Hayes Clark was found in the lake near the 2700 block of Canterbury Street. Clark was born and raised in Austin and was the father of a 12-year-old boy. At the time of his death, he was working at KFC. He was last seen on Easter Sunday by his former partner, Regan Aparicio. According to her, he simply left the house and never returned. While officials have stated that foul play is not suspected in Clark's death, his family feels different. Aparicio stated, "I think that something is going on at the lake, and I just want anybody who has information, Austin Police Department or even just a random person. If you know anything, say it. And for the community in that area, just be safe at all times." These 4 men are not the only ones whose lives have come to a premature end in Lady Bird Lake. In the past 5 years, at least 18 people have drowned there. One highly publicized case was that of Martin Gutierrez in 2018. 25-year-old Gutierrez, originally from Coahoma, Mississippi, was a graduate of Texas Tech University, and he had been working in banking in Austin. The missing persons report describes him as a Hispanic man who is 5'8" and 160 pounds. Like many of the men who died this year, he had gone out for drinks with friends on the night of his disappearance. He had left a bar named The Alibi to walk home. He was last seen on Rainey Street around 1 a.m. on November 19th, and he had called a friend around 1:30 to ask for a ride. On November 26th, his body was located in the lake near 1300 block of East Riverside Drive, a short distance from where he was last seen. The autopsy showed evidence of alcohol intoxication at the time of his death, but no traces of illicit drugs. His death was ruled an accidental drowning, but his family remains unconvinced of this explanation. They campaigned for further investigation, but they were ultimately unsuccessful. His father noted that he appeared to be acting erratically on surveillance footage from the night of his disappearance, and that his body reportedly had a bruise on the back of the head. In 2019, one young man narrowly escaped a brush with death at the lake. 21-year-old Christian Pugh had been seen walking down Rainey Street in the early morning of November 17th before his disappearance. He was described as a white man standing at 5'10" and weighing 160 pounds. A police report released at the time stated that there are circumstances in this case that lead investigators to believe Christian could be in danger. Pugh was finally found on November 19th in an area of brush on the opposite side of the lake from where he was last seen. He was alive, but was described as being in very rough condition and suffering from unspecified injuries. One report states that Pugh had been hit in the head and had bruised hands. He was transported to the intensive care unit at Del Seaton Medical Center. Little additional information is available. In response to the recent deaths, members of the community have been campaigning for measures to prevent future tragedies. Their efforts have resulted in the installation of a lighting system around the lake and an increased police presence on Rainey Street. Authorities may label these cases as unfortunate accidents, but a growing number of people are gripped by the horrifying suspicion that a serial killer is orchestrating these deaths. The chilling echoes of the Smiley Face Killer's victimology and methodology are too stark for some to ignore. Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, the former detectives who first formulated the Smiley Face Killer theory, discussed the Chicago deaths on a recent podcast. They believe that the deaths are connected to the Smiley Face Killers, and they point out that two of the victims, Joubert and Biscarin, disappeared from the same street, only 1 block away from each other. Furthermore, several of the victims attended the University of Illinois, which they argue indicates a targeted stalking campaign. They also point out the cosmic symbology of the names of the bars where Joubert and Biscarin were last seen, Howl at the Moon and Celeste, respectively. They believe this could indicate a ritualistic motive for the killings. In an article by Newsweek on the Austin deaths, Gannon again expressed suspicions of a serial killer. The similarities in the nature of their disappearances, bars, have been there for years. All of a sudden, these deaths happen at the same time. It's not consistent with normal accidental drownings. FBI agent Tracy Walder argues that the proximity and the Chicago victims' ages, the fact that they are all males, and the manner of their deaths all point towards a serial killer. Some argue that foul play is not involved, and that the deaths are coincidences that are being sensationalized by the media. Many of the former criticisms of the Smiley Face Killer theory apply to the speculation about the deaths in Chicago and Austin. The similarities in the victims' profiles could merely indicate that college-aged men are more likely to drink excessively and suffer fatal accidents as a result of intoxication. This explanation is much simpler than a gang of criminals targeting young men, but is it true? The Great Lakes Surf Rescue Project compiles yearly statistics about drownings in Lake Michigan. These statistics could help determine whether there are an unusual number of young men drowning in Chicago, or simply an increase in reporting of these incidents. According to the project, there were 45 drowning deaths in Lake Michigan in 2022, with 18 occurring in Chicago, and 6 of those involving males aged between 18 and 30. In 2021, there were 13 drownings in Chicago, with 4 involving young men. And in 2020, there were 19 drownings in Chicago, with 4 involving young men. The year with the highest number of deaths was 2019, during which 11 young men drowned. The project's records go back to 2013, and over that period, there were approximately 5 drownings of young males per year. It's difficult to draw any firm conclusions from the limited data available, and it's unclear how reliable the statistics are. However, the number of deaths in recent years is not an obvious outlier compared to historical trends. According to a statement by the Chicago Police Department, the number of fatal drownings in Cook County has actually decreased in recent years. Similar centralized statistics are not available for Austin. However, according to one news report, there have been 26 drownings in Lady Bird Lake since 2008, and 5 late-night drownings near Rainey Street since 2014. It is also worth noting that not all of the cases mentioned fit the victim profile. For example, 3 of the Chicago cases included female victims, some elderly. Additionally, drowning deaths are particularly complex. According to Knight's forensic pathology, pathological proof of drowning is often difficult or even impossible to obtain. The autopsy diagnosis of drowning presents one of the major problems in forensic medicine, especially when there is delay in recovering the victim. There are few reliable indicators of drowning on autopsy, and it can be difficult to identify such changes if the body has been in the water for an extended period of time. The fact that some deaths remain unsolved could reflect the limitations of forensic medicine rather than pointing to a more nefarious cause. In March 2023, the Chicago Police Department released a statement. At this time, there is no evidence suggesting there is a connection between these drowning deaths. The Chicago Police Department conducts thorough death investigations as we work to bring a measure of closure to the families of these and all victims. Many residents of the city continue to believe that foul play could be involved. The Austin Police Department issued a similar statement on April 3rd. There is no evidence in any of these cases to support allegations of foul play. The results of these autopsies have not revealed any trauma to the bodies nor indication of foul play. One common theme of the drownings in Austin this year is the combination of alcohol and easy access to Lady Bird Lake. Yet these explanations have not calmed the mounting fears. Social media is awash with groups subscribing to the serial killer theory, their ranks swelling to tens of thousands. The families of the victims continue their tireless campaign for justice. Regardless of the true cause behind these deaths, they have sown seeds of fear and concern. The tragic end of these individuals, whether the handiwork of a sadistic criminal organization or merely a series of unfortunate accidents, have left a deep scar in these communities. They serve as a grim reminder of life's fragility and the abrupt, senseless manner in which it can be extinguished. We can only hope that the ongoing investigations will bring much-needed closure to the victims and their families.